Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all today. My name is Annalie Stevens, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this online service of Quimper, Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. We are a loving, spirited, and inclusive congregation. As you know, while our physical sanctuary can be found in Port Townsend, the sanctuary of our values and principles are really found in the hearts and minds of all curious and creative people wherever they live. So, let's take a few deep breaths, settle our minds, and enter this hour with our hearts open. It's so good to be together. In a few moments, we'll be lighting the chalice. You might want to get a candle and matches to light your own, if that pleases you, as we light ours. In this way, we can all enter this time together. We'll now hear our call to community, sung by Sigrid Cummins and John Hanson on piano.
There is a love holding me. There is a love in this love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding all. We rest in this love.
We will now have our chalice lighting. Though our knowledge is incomplete, our truth partial, and our love imperfect, we believe that new light is ever waiting to break into our hearts and minds, to enlighten our common path, that there is mutual strength in willing cooperation, and that the bonds of love keep open the gates of freedom.
The opening words for today's service are a prayer from the East Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore. This prayer: where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Bode will now share a story for all ages.
Good morning, everyone. Today we are talking about America in all the complexity and history of this country and how we dig deep into what our ideals are and what is at stake. I'm not sure about you, but I have spent many hours over this summer listening and watching Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton and thinking about the great experiment of America, what audacious ideals we were founded upon, and how it takes continued creativity for us to move forward and fix what is missing in America today. So I wanted to share this story with you, which is What Do You Do with an Idea by Kobe Yamada, because it made me think of the idea of America and also the different ideas that are needed today. One day, I had an idea. Where did it come from? Why is it there? I wondered, what do you do with an idea? At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed kind of strange and fragile, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I just walked away from it. I acted like it didn't belong to me. But it followed me. And I worried what other people would think. And what would people say about my idea? And I kept it to myself. I hid it away and didn't talk about it. I tried to act like everything was the same as it was before my idea showed up. But there was something magical about my idea. I had to admit, I felt better and happier when it was around. It wanted food, and it wanted to play, and actually it wanted a lot of attention. It grew bigger, and we became friends. I showed it to other people, even though I was afraid of what they might say. I was afraid that if people saw it, they would laugh at it. I was afraid that they would think it was silly. And many of them did. They said it was no good. They said it was too weird. They said it was a waste of my time and that it would never become anything. At first, I believed them. I actually thought about giving up on my idea, and I almost listened to them. But then I realized, what do they really know? This is my idea, I thought, and no one knows it like I do. And it's okay if it's different. I decided to protect it, to care for it, and I fed it good food, and I worked with it, and I played with it, but most of all, I just gave it my attention. And my idea grew, and so did my love for it. I built it a new house, one with an open roof where it could look up at the stars, a place where it could be safe to dream. I liked being with my idea. It made me feel more alive, like I could do anything. It encouraged me to think big, and then to think bigger. It shared its secrets with me, and it showed me how to walk on my hands. Because, it said, it is good to have the ability to see things differently. I couldn't imagine my life without it. Then something amazing happened. My idea changed right before my very eyes. It spread its wings, it took flight, and it burst into the sky. I don't know how to describe it, but it went from being here to being everywhere. It wasn't just a part of me. It was now a part of everything. And then I realized what you do with an idea. You change the world. The idea of the United States of America was an audacious one with many fundamental flaws and many fundamental hopes. And may we always be creative and expansive in how we commit to changing and growing this country together.
Thank you very much, Bo. That was wonderful. What we'd like to do now is acknowledge and welcome those of you who are visiting us this morning. If you're watching us on our Facebook page or on YouTube, you're invited to say hello in the comment section and tell us your name and where you're from. If you're having a little hard time seeing the comments section, simply take your computer or phone out of full screen, and you'll see the comment section up on the right. We'd love to hear from you. Also, we'll hope that you'll join us for our virtual coffee hour in our fellowship Zoom hall. If you don't have that link, it will be posted in the comments section at the end of the service. And if you find this service useful or inspirational, hopefully both, please share the link with your friends and family. So welcome, everybody. We are so delighted to have you here today. So we're now going to receive the offering. Today our collection will go towards the building program and staffing costs of QUUF. If you'd like to donate today, you have three options. You can text the amount you'd like to give to the number now showing at the bottom of your screen, or you can go to our website, QUUF.org, and click on the giving link. Or you can simply mail a check to QUUF. Just remember to put the name of the organization to which you are donating in the memo line. We will now most gratefully receive your offering as we listen to Andante Cantabile by Tartini. And Kristen Smith will be on violin. Helen Lorenzen will be on piano. Thank you so much, Helen and Kristen. That was truly lovely. We'll now share our joys and sorrows recognizing that our personal joys and sorrows are only a fragment of the joys and sorrows of the larger community of life. And I know that all of us are particularly aware of it these days. And so we're going to place this first stone, thinking particularly of the people of Iowa, where the tornadoes have so devastated property and the loss of lives. We lift these people up in our hearts, and we wish to place a stone for them. And now, within our congregation, we're going to light this first candle for all the people within and around our congregation who are working so valiantly to preserve our postal service, and also those who are working in the healthcare services so valiantly as well around COVID-19. Thank you. And now we light a candle of both sorrow and joy for Victoria Valenza. Her sorrow is that she recently broke both legs, making a very hard time, much harder, limiting totally her movement, of course. And the joy is that Victoria is so grateful that her daughter Melissa is taking good care of her. Victoria, we hope your healing is swift and thorough. And also that you will let us know if there's anything our pastoral care committee can do to help you. And now we light a candle of joy for Steve and Marnie Fiamingo, who mark their 25th wedding anniversary on Thursday, August 20th. Happy anniversary, Steve and Marnie. We wish you many more years of wedded bliss. And guess what? Today is also Steve's birthday, will be turning 60, and he'd like to have a stone placed for him. And now we place a final stone, holding in our hearts the joys and sorrows that we've shared, but also thinking of such joys and sorrows among us that are unexpressed, but of no less importance. And because I can feel the sorrows in myself, I know that many of us also have the same. I invite you now into a moment of silence, which will be followed by a musical response. I suppose we could introduce our guest speaker today by saying our guest speaker needs no introduction. And that indeed may be true for many of us. But having our minister emeritus, Bruce Bode, give his first sermon here at QUUF since retiring is really a big deal. Without going into great detail about his many ministerial posts in Grand Rapids, Houston, and Tulsa from 1978 until arriving here in 2004, I'd like to just remind you something that some of you may not know, that Bruce originally was a Calvinist and graduated from Calvin Theological Seminary in 1973. In making that immense shift in ideology to Unitarian Universalism and the deep soul searching that accompanied that decision, he's particularly welcome today to help us navigate our own soul searching in these times of political, moral, and spiritual crisis. I'm especially delighted to welcome my good friend and your good friend and our Minister Emeritus, Bruce Bode.
Thank you, Anzi, for your kind introduction. And I'd also like to thank Kate Lohr and the Sunday Services Committee for extending this invitation to speak today, and to thank the others who are participating in the service today in addition to Anzi Stevens. That would be Bo Olgren, Kristen Smith, Sigrid Cummings, John Hansen, Pat Rogers, and Helen Lawrenson, and also off camera and behind the scenes, the tech team of Joyce Francis, Nils Peterson, Stan Cummings, and Christiana Tweed. There is a lot that goes into creating and videoing such services, and I thank all of you. And since this is my first time to speak with you since I retired in June of 2018, I'd like to thank Kate Lohr in a more special way for her generosity, her liberality in enabling Flossie and me to stay connected with this fellowship following my retirement. The day after Flossie and I returned from a nearly 9-month camper van trek that basically picture-framed our country — you can't do this anymore, but we could then — we returned in March of 2019, and the day after we met with Kate at some length to discuss ways that we might stay connected with the fellowship and the larger Port Townsend community, which had become our home. Now, you should know, if you don't already know, that typically, in order to clear the way and to create space for new ministerial leadership, the recommended protocol for the retiring minister is to immediately die. And if the retiring minister is unwilling to do that, then to move far, far away. So I'd like to thank Kate for not pressuring me to take either of those two options. And given all that has happened since June of 2018, which emotionally seems like a generation ago, I'd like to say that I think our congregation is so very fortunate to have her as our minister, with her vast experience, her huge heart, her great passion, her work ethic, and her love of this place and the physical environment. And I know you'll believe me when I say that I don't envy her the task that is hers, as I'm sure you can appreciate the weight of providing leadership to a lively and spirited religious community like ours. That weight can be heavy even in normal times, but particularly now in these times of stress, the weight increases in magnitude. So thank you, Kate. Well, after going completely fallow in my first year of retirement, this past year I've actually done a fair amount of what is called pulpit supply, providing Sunday services lately via live Zoom for Unitarian Universalist congregations in our general area, and particularly for mostly smaller lay-led congregations. And from a message this morning, initially, I thought I would give a sermon that had to do with how to maintain an anchor point in this time of pandemic. But then, as the summer wore on, a couple of weeks ago, I decided that it would be preferable to give one related to the racial, political, moral, and spiritual crisis that our nation is currently in the midst of. And so what you're going to get from me this morning are some of my thoughts and a number of quotes that I have been accumulating over the summer, particularly since the agonizing death of George Floyd on May 25. And the first two quotes, they are going to serve as my reading, are fairly lengthy excerpts from two sources of very different backgrounds and experiences, each of which addresses and reaffirms the American dream, the American experiment, or what theologian Forrest Church calls the American creed, which I'll be talking about in my sermon. But they reaffirm these by way of protest, that is, by way of calling out our distance from the dream, experiment, or creed. These readings will take about 8 minutes to read, and my sermon, which will follow the hymn, We Would Be One, my sermon will take approximately 20 minutes. So the first reading consists of excerpts from that classic poem, Let America Be America Again. It was written by the black poet Langston Hughes. It was a poem that was inspired by a train journey that Langston Hughes took through Depression-struck America in 1935. The poem, written in the non-inclusive gender language of the day, focuses on the idea of the American dream, and for so many, attaining freedom, equality, and happiness, which that dream encapsulates, is nigh onto impossible. And yet, the dream might still be fulfilled. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America to me. Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great, strong land of love where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme that any man be crushed by one above. It never was America to me. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. There's never been equality for me nor freedom in this homeland of the free. Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark? And who are you that draws your veil across the stars? I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart. I am the Negro bearing slavery scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. Yet, I'm the one who dreamt our basic dream to build a homeland of the free. The free? Who said the free? Not me. Surely not me. The millions on relief today, the millions shot down when we strike, the millions who have nothing for our pay. For all the dreams we've dreamed and all the songs we've sung and all the hopes we've held and all the flags we've hung, the millions who have nothing for our pay except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again. The land that never has been yet, and yet must be. The land where every man is free. The land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain must bring back our mighty dream again. Oh yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. And yet, I swear this oath, America will be. My second reading is a more recent protest, which no doubt most of you have heard about and many of you have perhaps read. It's a protest from over 2 months ago, and it comes from an unlikely source, the Marine General James Mattis, who finally, after the Lafayette Square incident on June 1, broke his silence with respect to the president for whom he had served as Secretary of Defense for 2 years until he resigned in December 2018. I'm going to read some paragraphs from his statement in the Atlantic, June 3. He titled his protest, "In Union, There is Strength." This from General James Mattis. I have watched this week's unfolding events, angry and appalled. The words, "equal justice under the law," are carved in the pediment of the United States Supreme Court. This is precisely what protesters are rightly demanding. It is a wholesome and unifying demand, one that all of us should be able to get behind. We must not be distracted by a small number of lawbreakers. The protests are defined by tens of thousands of people of conscience who are insisting that we live up to our values as people and our values as a nation. We do not need to militarize our response to protests. We need to unite around a common purpose, and it starts by guaranteeing that all of us are equal before the law. Instructions given by the military departments to our troops before the Normandy invasion reminded soldiers that the Nazi slogan for destroying us was "divide and conquer." Our American answer is, "In union, there is strength." We must summon that unity to surmount this crisis, confident that we are better than our politics. Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years of this deliberate effort. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years without mature leadership. We can unite without him, drawing on the strengths inherent in our civil society. This will not be easy, as the past few days have shown, but we owe it to our fellow citizens, to past generations that bled to defend our promise, and to our children. We can come through this trying time stronger and with a renewed sense of purpose and respect for one another. The pandemic has shown us that it is not only our troops who are willing to offer the ultimate sacrifice for the safety of the community. Americans in hospitals, grocery stores, post offices, and elsewhere have put their lives on the line in order to serve their fellow citizens and their country. We know that we are better than the abuse of executive authority that we witnessed in Lafayette Square. We must reject and hold accountable those in office who would make a mockery of our Constitution. At the same time, we must remember Lincoln's better angels and listen to them as we work to unite. Only by adopting a new path, which means, in truth, returning to the original path of our founding ideals, will we again be a country admired and respected at home and abroad. This from General James Mattis, June 3. The chancel choir of the First Unitarian Church of Oakland, California, will now lead us in the hymn, "We Would Be One." You are invited to sing or hum along with the words that will appear on the screen.
We would be one, as now we join in singing our hymn of love, to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow, a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which finds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice, strive to make us free.
The American Creed. It's a phrase and concept that was introduced to me by a ministerial colleague, the Reverend Dr. Forrest Church, in a little book he authored titled The American Creed, A Spiritual and Patriotic Primer. Forrest Church, who died of esophageal cancer in the fall of 2009 at the age of 61, was the son of Idaho Senator Frank Church, who, as some of you may remember, put himself forward as a Democratic nominee for president in 1976 before withdrawing in favor of Jimmy Carter. And Forrest, who worked on his father's campaign, debated with himself whether to go into politics, as he was invited to do, or into organized religion, ultimately choosing organized religion and becoming then the senior minister of the All Souls Church in New York City for almost 30 years. During his lifetime, Forrest was also our most prominent Unitarian Universalist theologian, the author or co-author of over 20 books, and one of his best, in my judgment, is this little book, The American Creed, which was published in 2002 in the aftermath of the searing experience of 9/11, the All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City being very close to ground zero. What is it, Forrest asked, following that horror in his city? What is it that binds us together as a people? The answer he gave was embodied in what he called the American Creed. Now, it's somewhat ironical that a minister for a religious organization like ours, which prides itself in being non-creedal, should speak of the American creed, but here is his argument for doing so. Creed, he says, sounds forbidding and ecclesiastical. The American creed is neither, but it is monumental. Creeds, he writes, have to be monumental, struck in metal, that when refined in the furnace of history and burnished by developing thought, can endure the trials of time. They have to be steadfast enough to redeem history itself, reawakening tired minds, rekindling passion in hearts grown weary. Creeds, he says, are spiritual touchstones. They are finished in fire, yet cool to the touch when passed from hand to hand, one generation to the next. So, what is the American creed? Writes Forrest, capturing the essence of the American experiment, the American creed affirms those truths our founders held self-evident: justice for all, because we are all created equal, and liberty for all, because we are all endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. America's fidelity to this creed, Forrest says, is judged by history. Living up to it remains a constant challenge, but it invests our nation with spiritual purpose if we honor its precepts, a moral destiny. Now, as indicated in that quote I just read, the spiritual and moral vision of America, our primary creed, as Forrest puts it, is succinctly summarized in the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. And another clear statement of it is found in Thomas Jefferson's first inaugural address delivered in 1801. The irony, of course, being that both these statements of the American creed were penned by a man who was completely enmeshed in America's original sin of slavery, the stain of which we are so acutely aware of at this time. And yet, here's a second clear statement of the American creed from a flawed human being, a man blind perhaps or unable, unwilling to live out an essential part of that creed. From Jefferson's first inaugural address. Equal and exact justice to all, of whatever state or persuasion, religious or political. Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. Freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of person. These principles form, says Jefferson, the bright constellation which has gone before us and guided our steps through an age of revolution and reformation. The wisdom of our sages and the blood of our heroes have been devoted to their attainment. They should be the creed of our political faith, the text of civil instruction, the touchstone by which to try the services of those we trust. And should we wander from them in moments of error or alarm, let us hasten to retrace our steps and to regain the road which alone leads to peace, liberty, and safety. When Forrest Church wrote the American Creed in 2002 following 9/11, we were at an inflection point in our country relating to whether we were a nation committed to a larger moral and spiritual vision beyond simple self-interest and self-preservation. Were we one among the many nations, or did we have to be number one? As it seems to me and many others, we are failing to live up to that larger moral vision at an ever-accelerating pace. And now, it would seem, we are at another inflection point in our nation, not now so much related to equality among the nations as opposed to nationalistic dominance, but now of equality and justice within our nation rather than racial dominance. English author G.K. Chesterton once said that America is the only nation in the world that is founded on a creed set forth, he said, with theological lucidity in the Declaration of Independence. America, he said, is a nation with the soul of a church, which is to say that at the center of our nation, there has been a moral idea and ideal that has constituted our nation's soul and which has been an inspiration to many other nations. And now, again, in our time, there is a desperate, desperate struggle for the soul of our nation. What is the soul of our nation? Do we have a moral vision? Are we, as retired U.S. Marine Corps 4-star General John Allen put it some weeks ago, are we at the beginning of the end of the American experiment? Or is this a time, through the ongoing protests coming from many quarters, in which we are being called back to our moral vision, to reaffirm our American creed, to deepen our understanding of it, and to fulfill as never before its mandate and calling? Part of what is bringing this American soul struggle forward at this time is, as General James Mattis has written, the vacuum of leadership at the top. In that we have a president who, from where I stand, has no feel for our nation's soul, and who does not share the moral vision of the American creed, who to me quite simply is rendered incapable of having a moral vision because of personal psychological deficits, everything being self-referential. Sadly, dangerously, as by now should be abundantly clear, our president is not a normal person, and we should not expect him to act normally. He lacks the human faculty of empathy. And until and unless there is some type of personal breakthrough, he cannot feel the pain of others. Only the hole in his own soul, which would be loved. And thus, like the scorpion in the animal fable of the scorpion and the frog, he must sting, even to his own detriment. He must lash out. He must insult, belittle, berate, and blame others. He must seek revenge. He must go low. He cannot help himself, given his present psychic reality. And thus, he is opportunistically willing to play to Christian nationalists who have a very different interpretation of the American creed, believing that conservative Christianity should hold a privileged place in America's public square, and who thus have struck a bargain with Donald Trump, in which they are willing to overlook his personal psychological deficits and moral failings in order to obtain their ends. This willingness by Donald Trump to play to the Christian nationalists out of personal psychological need was most nakedly on display on June the 1st, when the president crossed Lafayette Square from the White House to awkwardly hold up a Bible in front of St. John's Episcopal Church. A little over 2 months ago, on June 19, Juneteenth, Freedom Day, marches were held across the country commemorating the end of slavery and the Emancipation Proclamation. It was also on this day in 1964 that the Civil Rights Act was passed in Congress after a long battle in the Senate. 13 days later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the act into law affirming as he did the American Creed with these words: "We believe all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings because of the color of their skin. The reasons are deeply embedded in history and tradition and the nature of man. We can understand without rancor or hatred how this happened, but it cannot continue. Our Constitution forbids it, the principles of our freedom forbid it, morality forbids it, and now the law forbids it." As indicated in this 1964 Civil Rights Act, the reaffirmation of our American creed also involves a deepening of our understanding of what it means. And you may have noted in that quotation from President Johnson the lack of gender-inclusive language, which speaks to another deepening of our understanding, which was yet to come. In regard to this deepening and enlarging of our understanding of the American creed, some poetic lines of the 19th century American poet James Russell Lowell come to my mind, where he writes, "New occasions teach new duties. Time makes ancient good uncouth. They must upward still and onward who would keep abreast of truth." Time makes ancient good uncouth. New occasions teach new duties. We are currently struggling with this question in multiple ways. For example, which commemorative statues to keep in place, which to remove. To what extent do the shortcomings and blind spots of our forebears, as viewed by us in the rearview mirror in hindsight and with the passage of time, to what extent are the ideals and principles they brought forward overshadowed by their failure to more fully live them out? For the last couple of months, I have been receiving a daily blog news summary by Heather Cox Richardson. She's an American historian, professor of history at Boston College. I highly recommend her daily news summaries to you. If you're interested, let me know. I'll give you the link. Bill Moyers recently interviewed her. But I'm bringing her name forward today because I want to read a portion of her blog from July 4, which relates to this question of honoring the founders of our republic. Dr. Richardson writes, "On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence declaring, 'We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.' For all the fact that the congressman got around the sticky little problem of black and Indian slavery by defining men as white men, and for all that it never crossed their mind that women might also have rights, the Declaration of Independence was an astonishingly radical document. In a world that had been dominated by a small class of rich men for so long that most people simply accepted that they should be tied forever to their status at birth, a group of upstart legislators on the edge of a wilderness continent declared that no man was born better than any other. America was founded on the radical idea that all men are created equal." In this blog, Dr. Richardson goes on to indicate that we are now once again struggling with this founding principle of equality as, quote, "A few wealthy men seek to reshape America into a nation in which certain people are better than others." All men are created equal. The first principle of our Unitarian Universalist Association restates and enlarges this first self-evident principle of the American Creed by affirming and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And let me thus conclude my sermon today with the following idea, namely, that the religious association of which we are a part is a quintessentially American religion. And this is because the principles, values, and ideals that we hold dear in our religious association are also core principles, values, and ideals of our American democracy. The triple values of religious liberty, religious toleration, and religious pluralism, as well as the following principles, values, and ideals which, as an association of congregations, we have covenanted to affirm and promote: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, the right of conscience, and the use of democratic processes, and the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Both our Unitarian and our Universalist forebears were at the forefront in bringing forward the core principles, values, and ideals that constitute our American experiment, our American dream, our American creed. And thus I would contend that we are or ought to be at the forefront again in this time when these core principles, values, and ideals of our American experiment are under threat and in peril. In our tradition, we have a saying: revelation is not sealed. Revelation is not sealed. That is, our understanding of truth is not final and fixed, but evolutionary, unfolding over time. Following this notion, we should be at the forefront in interpreting and reinterpreting the American Creed for our time. In this regard, a few weeks ago, I received an email from Roger Anderson. He's a member of this congregation, in which he gives voice to his thoughts related to Independence Day, and I would like to conclude, with his permission, by reading what he sent me. Dear friends, the 4th of July has long held a special place in my heart. I suspect the spectacle alone was enough to get my attention as a child. But soon I began to appreciate that something special had happened in 1776. The world really did start to change. On July 4 each year, we usually pause long enough to recall the familiar language that we are all created equal and have unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. White males like me usually have stopped there, complacent and self-righteous, proud to be Americans. But this year, all of us are challenged to figure out how to respond to overlapping crises that have disproportionately fallen on Americans of color: police killings, COVID-19 deaths, and unemployment. These effects have many causes, but a central factor is how our society is structured. The Declaration itself offers guidance for how to proceed. Among other self-evident truths, it notes that, quote, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of securing these unalienable rights, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness, end quote. Roger Anderson continues, for nearly 250 years, we have been able to avoid abolishing our government. Instead, we restructure our flawed democracy to meet new understandings of how governments ought to relate to citizens. Awakened by nationwide calls for change, we now have both the opportunity and the duty to build on those uneven experiences. We must be willing to honor our founding principles by again reorganizing our governments at all levels to better ensure those fundamental rights. We are yet again called by Lincoln to dedicate ourselves to bringing to our country a new birth of freedom. Roger Anderson, amen, and so may it be. Our concluding hymn, We'll Build a Land, is performed by members of the Kitsap Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Bremerton. The credits, as well as the words with which you are invited to sing along, will appear on the screen.
From mold,
It's that time now that we're going to extinguish our chalice. But before you do that, I'd like to remind you that our annual blessing of the animal service will take place virtually next Sunday. If you've already submitted a photo of your pet, living or deceased, thank you so much. But if you haven't, you have until tomorrow. Please get those photos to Phyllis Waldenberg. And now, let us join our voices for our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish our flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. After the service, I hope you'll join us for our virtual coffee hour. You can expect to be included in a Zoom room with one of our coffee hosts, who will facilitate a personal check-in as well as reflection on today's sermon. I hope to see you there. But first, let us turn our attention to Sigrid Cummins, Katie Taylor, and Pat Rogers, who will sing our postlude, There Is a Love.
There is a love